Hopefully you can.
Now we can.
All right, excellent. So, as Chanel mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about some fundamental presentation skills, but before I do, there's the ever-present question of who am I and why should you care who I am. So I'm a data analytics director for McKesson Corporation. I've got a background in business and fine arts and performing arts as well, and I've presented to various audiences. I'm very, very passionate about data and internal auditing. I pitched the idea of this presentation because I felt like this is something that it's a skill set that can get in the way if you haven't mastered it or started to work on mastering it. It can get in the way of your career progression. And so I thought I had a unique background to bring to it because both a lot of presentation skills, seminars, and advice comes purely from a business perspective, but I also wanted to introduce some of the performing arts perspective as well. So objective setting, what we're going to talk about today is what I consider the fundamentals for creating effective presentations. And I'm going to show you some key considerations to help you prepare for those presentations, as well as some tips and tricks that'll help you improve your presentation skills. So the three main sections, I'm not going to leave you anticipating what those three fundamentals are. They're here right up front. The three main sections I'll cover are know your audience, know yourself, and know your subject. And after each of the sections, I'll pause so that Chanel can pose any questions that come through the chat, and we can pause and answer those questions. So as you have things, as I'm speaking and you have things that come to mind, go ahead and put them in the chat, and we'll cover them at the end of each of the sections. So I mentioned know your audience, and in an effort to know my audience, I've got a poll that 3 questions that will help me understand where everybody's at, and hopefully I can focus the presentation more on where people want the most help. So if you can go to pollev.com, it's right up there at the top of the slide, pollev.com/rbrooks886, and answer that question. As I change slides, you'll get new questions, so stay in that browser. I'll give everyone a few minutes to kind of find it and start making some selections. There we go.
I just posted the link to the poll in the chat as well, so if anyone wants to right-click it and then open URL.
Awesome. I'm seeing a trend here. It seems like mostly peers, colleagues, and very few clients. So I'll give it just a few more minutes. Okay, we got some subordinates, no others yet, which is good because I couldn't think of any other that you would be presenting to. Okay, all right, so about 50%, a little over half is peers and colleagues. That's helpful. I'll try to frame examples with that in mind. I think personally the most terrifying one is typically executive or department leadership. It's easier to present to your peers. So I'll also mention that as some things with that as well. Next question: how comfortable are you giving presentations? Some scattering across the board. Well, it's good that not everybody was the most happy face, because then my job would be done and we would just end the presentation. Everybody's comfortable. But it looks like it's fairly normal distribution. Some people not at all comfortable, a lot of people kind of in the middle. So it's good, good information for me. And last question is, where do you feel like you need the most guidance for giving presentations? And this is a free text, so you type in whatever you want. If somebody's already put in something that you agree with, you can upvote it. So this could be as many or as few as we want. Okay, calming nerves, definitely. We're gonna cover that a little bit better. How to know my audience, that's perfect. That's one of the 3 fundamentals, so we're definitely gonna cover that. Making complicated technology easy, that's a really, really good point. I don't know that I'll cover that too much, but we can certainly, at the end of the session, we've got some breakout time. So maybe that's an area that a time we can cover that. How to be confident, good. Yeah, I'll touch on that a little bit as well. Nonverbal communication, flow. This is good. The topic of giving presentations is something that you could break. It could be like a whole week-long seminar and it still wouldn't cover everything. So this is great feedback. I appreciate it. Okay. So it looks like some of the top ones are knowing your audience better, how to be more confident, calming nerves, and then making a complex subject into something that's easier to understand, and improvisation a little bit. So responding to unexpected confidently. Great. Well, I'll touch a little bit on each of these, which is good. And I'll give you some techniques. And again, we have the breakout sessions at the end and the question and answers for each pause. So if I don't cover something that you want to cover, then make sure I do. Hold me accountable. So the first one, knowing your audience. The questions that I ask myself when I'm trying to understand who my audience is one, who's listening, and what are the stakes? So some things to consider are, is this somebody that, is it within my organization? Do they already know the jargon? Do they already, what do they know and not know in terms of the project that I'm working on? Is it somebody that's within my department? Is it somebody that can impact my career? Is it somebody that's making decisions about whether or not my project goes forward? Those are the stakes that more than anything else, when I say stakes, that's what you would consider in terms of how much you're going to prepare. And the higher the stakes, the more you prepare. And towards the end, when I talk about, or when I get to the sections about knowing yourself, that and knowing your subject, that's when we're going to talk about rehearsing and how important it is. Some other things to consider when you're talking about who's listening is cultural considerations. What is who, if your audience is your peers, and I know a lot of us work in multicultural departments, and we've got people from different backgrounds. It's important to consider that when you're putting together your presentation. In general, we tend to speak as we normally speak and have a very informal style, and so that's why it's typically easier to present to our peers or colleagues, because they're one of us, they're used to it. But even so, when we get nervous and we get into the space where we're unsure, that's when we kind of default into idioms, and we don't really think outside of our own perspective. And so one thing to avoid and to be aware of is just in general, try to avoid idioms. There's something that we do without thinking about it, but I have one of my employees is she's from China, and when we were having a discussion, and a coworker said, "Yeah, I just hit a wall," and she was very, very, very worried about our poor coworker's safety because he hit a wall, not realizing that it's an idiom that we use to say, you know, I'm exhausted. We had another coworker who, you know, she's also an immigrant and didn't, you know, her boss at the time said, "Yeah, I've been putting out fires all day." And she was very worried about her boss having to put out all of these burning things around her. So that's something to be considerate of, as well as what are the things that they care about. If you're a big sports fan, it may come naturally to you just to make analogies related to sports or things that are going on in sports, but not everybody is a sports fan. So just in general, try to avoid things unless you really know your audience and know that that's something that they would appreciate. And I don't know about you, but I work in internal auditing, and it's something that there's a lot of stereotypes about auditors being introverted and nerdy, and that's like true for half of us maybe, but we're actually pretty outgoing as a profession. And so anytime I go to a conference and we've got somebody who's not in the profession come and speak to us, and they're like, they make assumptions that we're all introverted and numbers people, and you know, I know it turns me off, and I'm like, how can I trust you when you haven't done the work to understand who I am as a person and what the profession that you came to speak to is all about. So that's another element of it, is understanding who, you know, don't stereotype. We're women who code, but that doesn't mean that everyone in women who code is a woman. So, you know, we just like we don't want to be stereotyped. Don't stereotype your audience. That's also important. If they, like, again, I mentioned that are they within your organization or are they not within your organization, is to whether or not, and whether they're in your profession or not in your profession, is making sure that you're not using too much jargon. So I think it was one of the things that making complicated technical elements accessible to executives. Part of that is finding words other than the words you're used to and explaining that. So it's all well and good, but how do you do that? Well, the way that you do that is you research. You can, if it's more than just an online search. If you're going to present to executives, talk to your boss, talk to a mentor, somebody who has gone before those executives, but even that specific executive before, and ask them, what do they appreciate? What do they like? What do they not like? What kind of presentation elements usually win them over? Typically, how receptive are they when I'm asking for money versus giving some good news about a project that's saving money or improving efficiency. That's where, so one example, I worked for a retail company, and the CFO was if you didn't have the numbers, he definitely wanted to see the numbers. You could have the prettiest graph in the world, but he would hate it, and he wanted to see the actual rows of data. But then he would take those rows of data and he would look at it and find exactly the same thing that you were trying to point out with the graph in a matter of seconds. That was his preferred style of seeing the information that you're presenting. So when I had to go in front of him and give a presentation on an audit that was done, if I hadn't taken the time to talk to my department head and ask, what is this guy like? How should I present this information? I would have gone in with the world's prettiest graph that you've ever seen, and he would have immediately said, where's the data? So that's another way that you can make sure that you can make the information accessible to executives is find out what they know and what they don't know. The other thing about executives and anybody really is peers as well is don't assume that they don't know something, but plan for them to not know it. So get ready to explain, but particularly with executives, if you have a really brief, concise explanation, they get it and they're like, okay, yes, I got it, go ahead. So don't over-explain. So the breakout again, most of us are presenting to peers. What all of these groups have in common is what all of us as human beings have in common is we really care about ourselves and what we want, and the way that this works out in terms of these groups is typically executives are concerned about what is the business impact. So how does this impact my business? Peers want to know, how does this affect me? Is it going to change my process? Am I going to have to do some extra work? What is this? How does this affect me? Subordinates in a similar way. So what extra work do I have to do now? And then customers and clients, they want to know, how is this helping me? What you're presenting, how is it helping me? And so the way that you can structure and break it down and the things that you think, the things to make sure that you're covering, to be concise and to make sure that you're addressing what they want is four things. First is, what's the point? What's the main point or the results that you're trying to communicate? If you don't know this, find out pretty quickly, because if you don't know what the point is, then your audience certainly is not going to understand what the point is of your presentation. And the benefit is once you do get a good grasp of what you're trying to communicate, what the point is and what the results are, then that becomes the thing that you can repeat and continue to drive home or get across. The other thing is, what action is needed? So you're going to ask this question, what do you want them to do? If it's an executive, this might be where, my point was we achieved a 10% reduction in cost with the implementation of this new application, but we don't have enough resources to continue to support the application. So then my action, what I want from them is I need additional funding to support the application. I've told you this is good, and here's what I need you to do to continue to support it. Then the next thing is context. What additional context does the audience need? And so you've started with, what's the point? What do you want them to do? And then now you're going to say, here's some additional context that you need to understand. So costs for, the cost for this ongoing support is going to be X, but the projected cost improvement is, with this application is going to be Y. So they have the context they need to say, is it to make the decision, is it worth it for me to go ahead and give you the money to invest in the application? Context is something that, I'll talk a little bit about this later as well. With context is important, but you don't want to overload people with context in your presentations. It's something that I tend to, you have it and you make sure that it's there, you put it in the notes, you put it in an appendix, it's there if the questions are asked, but it's not overloading the slides that you're going through. And then same thing, evidence. So this is, what additional evidence, if they don't, if you say it's going to cost X and it's going to cost X, but then projected improvements are going to be Y, then you're going to want that evidence, the data. Again, you've done the research, you know that this executive likes the data, or this executive likes visuals, or this, you've got both because you're talking to peers, and half your peers like it in this format, the other half like it in this format. So you've done the work to make sure that it's in the format that they like, but you've got it available if you need it, if the question gets asked, but you're not overloading them with information by putting it all into the slides at once. So some do's and don'ts. Do give appropriate context. Don't condescend. There, at one point, I was asked to go to a junior high for their career fair and talk about internal auditing. It is, as you can imagine, something that most junior high students are enamored with. They love to hear about internal auditing. So, it was something that obviously the junior high students don't know my jargon. They don't know the terminology and the considerations and that I go through in a daily process. And it was something that I wanted to communicate what I do because it was a career fair, but I didn't want to give a vocabulary lesson, and I didn't want to condescend to them because what I do is understandable. I just had to put it into the context that they understood. So what I did was I explained a little bit about what I did and that my role as an internal auditor is to understand where the risks are happening in an organization and make sure that understand where things could go wrong and make sure that somebody is making sure that they don't go wrong. And I had them walk me through. We brainstormed together and walked through how they get ready to get to school for the day, and to make sure that they're getting good grades in school. And so we went through all of the things that could go wrong in them getting to school on time, and we talked about what could go wrong and what controls, although we didn't use that word, but what things that they have in place to make sure that they get to school on time. So yes, so give context, don't condescend, have the supporting details handy, don't be boring. Including different visual elements is also another thing everyone learns a little bit differently, and you won't always know what your audience, what their style is. And so if you include elements of a little bit of visual, a little bit of auditory, and some hands-on elements, then you're making sure that you've got all of those learning styles covered. In fact, later on in this presentation, we are going to have a little bit of a hands-on element, so I'm looking forward to doing a little bit of that with you as well. And do be aware of cultural considerations. Another tidbit, do block your notifications while sharing your screen. I know a few people who have gotten in trouble with that, having some fun IMs come up while they're giving presentations. And then do get input and feedback. Rehearsing is really important. If you have a chance, especially somebody who is aware of your audience and understands your audience, practice with them and get their input and their feedback. So I will pause here, and if we've had any questions at all come through the chat, and I'm happy to answer them.
We haven't had any questions come through, but if anyone has questions, they can feel free to type them and I'll.
Or unmute and ask too, now that we're paused.
So with the don't of being boring, I guess that's something that I've given a presentation or two and I haven't been boring, at least to my knowledge. And so I guess how could we know, I guess, that, by looking at our presentation and constructing it, and let's say we practiced it, what do you know of any tips or something to kind of, help us feel like, I don't think this is boring,
Yeah, and there's a couple of things that you can do. One is, as I mentioned before, get input and feedback. Have your coworkers, somebody that you trust, or your employees, or a mentor, or your spouse, go through it with them and practice with them as you would in real life, and get their feedback and their input. And if there's something that's not understandable, or that you can see their glazed over look in their eyes, then take that into consideration and look for ways that you can adjust it, make it more understandable, or break it up. So one thing to not be boring is to not stay on one slide too long. The more that the slides change, the more people are engaged. Another thing that that I like to do is, you can see below, I've got my my little loading bar that tells where you are. I appreciate that when I'm sitting in a presentation to know, all right, this is where we're at. The next one is know yourself, and I know it's going to end soon, so I can focus for a little bit more, a few more minutes. Another thing about boring, and this is something that I mentioned before, that I have the performing arts background, is vocal inflection and energy. So one way to not be boring is to actually be excited about what you're talking about. Because if you're not excited about it, your audience certainly has no motivation to be excited about it. And it's easier said than done to drum up that excitement, because even though something is exciting to us, or it's something that we've worked really hard on and we really want to share with everyone else, we tend to kind of stay in the mode of, we've been sitting at our desk all day long, and I'm a little bit tired, even though this is something I really like. It sounds like I'm not that excited about it, and we tend to pitch our voice a little lower, we talk a little quieter. So one thing to make sure that you stay excited, that I do, is I sit on the edge of my chair. I don't know if you can really tell, but I'm not back in my chair like this. I'm sitting on the edge of my chair with my feet on the ground. I've got that helps me keep my posture erect, which helps me stay energized. And it also helps me make sure that I don't slouch my shoulders in too much. We're going to talk a little bit more about that on knowing yourself and making sure that you've done some ways to prepare and make sure you've got good posture, and you've done some vocal warm-ups to make sure that you're not betraying yourself with your voice and posture. Good question. Anything else?
Sorry to interrupt you. There was one in the chat. So which platform did you use to make this presentation, and how did you include the poll inside of it?
This is PowerPoint, and the poll is Poll Everywhere. So you can sign up with an account with Poll Everywhere. The free account has some minor, like you can't really do a whole lot in terms of fancy bells and whistles, but you can get the PowerPoint add-on, download the PowerPoint add-on to be able to put it into PowerPoint.
I want to confirm about the PowerPoint. I really like it. Can you repeat, where can I find it?
The Poll Everywhere?
All everywhere?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So next area is knowing yourself. And this one, so it sounds very meta, know yourself, but it's important to understand and to think about how you want to be perceived. With everything that we do communicates something about us, whether we like it or not. And there's inherent things as human beings that we have a bias about, and that you can either benefit from or suffer from. One of the things is we tend to think that people who are dressed more professionally know more. It's not a across the board. Obviously, you still have to prove yourself. Somebody who's in a suit, as soon as they open their mouth and they say something stupid, well, then that's another. They've basically discredited themselves. But I know right out of business school, I knew next to nothing, and I went to go work for a consulting firm, as most people who know next to nothing do, and went into clients and would start asking questions and trying to understand their process. And then they, I remember being maybe 2 months into this new profession and asking, hey, are you doing something to make sure that this doesn't happen? And they said, the client, who is the SVP of a bank, said, no, we're not really doing anything like that. What would you suggest? And I was like, I don't know anything. I don't know what to suggest. But because I was, because of my position, my title, and the fact that I was dressed professionally and appeared to be a professional, they assumed that I knew something. So it can work against you. It can work for you, but it can also work against you. So it's better to default into, making sure that you're dressed professionally and you're well groomed. Another area that we tend, as human beings, we tend to listen and trust people who are attractive. And so, not to say that you have to be a supermodel. Attractive is different than beautiful or sexy. Attractive is making sure that you're, again, well-groomed and you're the best version of yourself. So something to consider, and make sure that you keep in mind. You don't have to, you don't need a makeover, but make sure that you're presenting the best version of yourself.
Would you say personality has anything also to play in this?
Absolutely. I was just about to say, the other thing is making sure that I've mentioned before that you're passionate. If you're passionate about it, then other people will become passionate about it. If it's something that if you're funny, then other people relax, and they're more willing to, they're more engaged and want to listen to what you have to say. The flip side of that is so what are you good at? Are you funny? Great, use that. Are you compassionate? Use that. Bring that into your presentation. Bring in your compassion into, especially if it's a product that you feel like really helps people. Bring that sense of compassion into the presentation with you. If you're a serious person, bring that seriousness into the presentation as well, and use that to help you communicate, why you think that this is important. If you're a bubbly person, bring that in as well. I know, that there's some bias against people who are too effervescent. So there's some amount that you have to kind of tamp down and make sure that you're not overly excited and seem like a flake or something like that. But don't lose it. It's something that is. I know a few people who are very bubbly. They have a very outgoing personality, and they've gotten the feedback from one or two people to say, "Oh, you should make sure that you're not too excited about this. Don't listen to them. Be excited, but again, be the best version of yourself." So if you're an excitable person, an effervescent person, bring that into the presentation. More people will be engaged by it than be turned off by it, and so those one or two people can be upset, but whatever. But the flip side of that is, if you are not a funny person, do not try to be a funny person. Don't tell a joke. There's some pervasive bad advice about engage your audience at the beginning of your presentation by telling a joke. If you are not funny, do not tell a joke. If you are not absolutely positive that joke will land with your audience, don't try it, because it's a surefire way to undermine what you're trying to do. Jokes in general don't, if it doesn't help communicate the point, then it's not useful for the presentation. I was in recently, a lot of things have moved to webinars as this presentation and many others. And the presenter, I think he probably heard the same bad advice, and he made a comment about, "But don't worry, I'm wearing pants." Like, there was no reason to say it, and now we're all thinking about whether or not you're actually wearing pants. So in general, if you're not good at something, that's a way for you to, one, avoid it if you can. And if you know that you're not good at something, you can either practice and get better and specifically ask for feedback around that, or you can structure your presentation so that you can avoid the things that you're bad at. So for me, one thing that I've gotten feedback before on is that I'm quiet, but I also know that I'm really passionate about the things that I care about, and so I use both of those elements. So I know that I'm quiet, and so I have to make sure that I do the vocal warm-ups, that I make sure that I'm sitting on the edge of my chair, and that I'm projecting the energy. But I also know that I've got passion, and I use that to make sure that I'm emphasizing the points that I really care about. I'm okay with improv. If you're not good with improvising, don't ask for audience participation. Find ways to avoid that. One other thing, I'm not really great at small talk, and so a lot of the presentations that I do are more like informal meetings where I'm guiding the agenda and presenting audit findings and things like that. And there's always that awkward moment at the beginning of any one of those conference calls where some people have joined, but not everybody, and so you've got to make that small talk. And I've written a list for myself of ask this person about their kids, ask this person about football game, so that I have notes for myself to remind myself how to small talk. So that's why it's important to know yourself.
Right. One I guess question, and I apologize for arriving late, but into this personality, you got to keep in mind, I guess, the code of conduct as well, right? I don't know if you spoke
absolutely.
about code of conduct.
Yeah, you never want to. We don't really talk about code of conduct. I'm assuming that you're talking about where you don't want to put people down or make
Right.
inappropriate comments. Absolutely, you want to keep that in mind.
Right. Thank you.
So, vocal warm-ups, vocal and other warm-ups. At the poll at the beginning, there was a lot of comments around confidence and relaxing, getting yourself so that you're calm in the presentations. This is something that can really help you relax. It will also improve your confidence, and it will help you make sure that you're overcoming any. I'm quiet. I tend to mutter, and so these help me make sure that I'm enunciating and projecting. So if you're not already on mute, go ahead and go on mute. And if you are comfortable, go ahead and share your screen so that we can all look silly together. I'll be the only one with the audio on, so you get to hear me do all of this stuff and look silly. But we're going to start with a breathing exercise. And the way that it works is you're going to inhale through your nose. And as you exhale, you're going to go, and when you hum out, let your shoulders relax, let your upper chest muscles relax, and so we're going to breathe in together. Just let the shoulders fall down, get away from your ears, let your chest open up. Then we're going to breathe in again, and when we do. When we hum out, we're going to engage your diaphragm as you hum out. Then you're going to occasionally pause yourself with your diaphragm and go, ha, 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 ha. And it sounds silly, but please do it. When you do that, you breathe in, you go, ha, 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 ha. What that does is it helps it loosen your diaphragm. And it helps remind your body that that's where you want to breathe from. So if anybody here is on here as a singer, you know that's where you can. That's where that's what your diaphragm is, what you use to make sure that you're getting all the air that you can behind your voice. And when we're talking in everyday conversation, we stay in our throats and we stay right up here, and we're not using our bellies to push the air out across our vocal cords. And what that does is it especially if you're going to do a long presentation or all day seminar or something like that, or we're going to be talking all day, by limiting what your diaphragm, the air push through your diaphragm, wear out your vocal cords, and you're going to get exhausted really quickly. And then it gets also really much harder to open your mouth and your throat to articulate and get sound out. For me, I have to, I mentioned I'm typically quiet. I make sure I engage my diaphragm so that I'm projecting, especially when I'm doing in live presentations, non-technology enabled presentations. So we're going to do that one more time. Go ahead, and if you haven't, you go ahead and shake out your arms. Get ready to do it. We're going to breathe in. Ha, 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 ha. All right, how's everybody feel about that one? Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to stretch. So we sit, every day we sit, most of us sit in front of a computer, and we start to slowly hunch and turn into the letter O. And it pulls our shoulders up, it pulls our chest around so that we can't expand our lungs. It brings our chin down, which will tighten the neck muscles. And the neck, these tendons and muscles are connected to your jaw. And so if they're tight, it's harder to open your mouth and enunciate and articulate. So we're going to stretch. We've done the breathing, the hum-has. We're going to pull our head to the left or right side, and just place your hand on top of that and get a nice stretch right in here. I'm going to hold that for about 10 seconds. And if you're not really feeling the stretch, reach down with your hand, with a hand that's going down. Reach down and really feel the stretch in your neck right here. Then after 10 seconds, we're going to roll back slowly and bring it to the other side. Bring our other hand up, stretch our downward hand down, and get a nice good stretch in our neck. Now this next one is one of my favorites. I'm certainly going to look silly. All of us are going to look silly, but we're going to do it together. It's called Raisins and Grapes, and the reason why is that the raisin part is you're going to scrunch your face up into as small a ball as possible and get everything wrinkled and all your lips together. Bring everything down, and then you're going to turn around and reverse it and open up everything as wide as possible. So, and then we're going to go back and do raisins again, and then we're going to go back to grapes. Now, yes, we look silly, but when you do this, you're going to find a room by yourself or with somebody you trust. Nobody's going to see you. It's going to help so much to make sure that you're stretching out your facial muscles, that you can get your mouth around all the words that you're going to have to say. Next one is tongue stretch. So your tongue is responsible for a lot of the various articulation between words, and can make a big difference between somebody understanding very similar words. So what you're going to do is you're going to put the tip of your tongue behind your front bottom teeth, and you're going to try and get the back of your tongue out as far forward as possible. So here's what it looks like. And you're going to have to open your mouth really wide in order to get the tongue out as far as possible. So it also does stretch your jaw muscles. So we're going to do it one more time. Okay. So I've got some practice. Now that we've stretched, we've relaxed, we've stretched our facial muscles, we're going to do some articulation practice. The point of this is to help us differentiate between very similar sounding word parts. And the point is this is not a tongue twister to see how fast you can go. It's, you think about it a bit like, resistance training. You want to go, if you need to go slow, that's fine. The important thing is that you are clearly enunciating the syllables. So this is This is one where it's aluminum linoleum, aluminum linoleum, and you're going to overemphasize that. So everybody say it with me. Aluminum linoleum, aluminum linoleum, aluminum linoleum. Toy boat, toy boat, toy boat. And on the boat, make sure you're getting your mouth all the way back. It's all these tiny little muscles around our mouth that we forget when we're sitting at our computers and we're just kind of muttering next to people next to us. If anybody speaks Italian, I've never been so exhausted when I've tried to practice speaking Italian, because they use all of these muscles. So we're going to start with toy boat. So toy boat, toy boat, toy boat, toy boat, toy boat. Red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather. Don't be afraid to really get overemphasized. That's really the point of this, is to work out all those tiny little muscles around your mouth and jaw. And then the last one is the big black bug bit the big black bear, and the big black bear bled blood. I spelled that wrong. Oops. Bled, not bleed. The big black bug bit the big black bear, and the big black bear bled blood. There's a number of these out there. You can search for warm-up exercises. If there's a particular, if you speak accented English, or you have, I know that I'm trying to learn French, and there are some French versions of this to make sure that you're differentiating between similar sounding syllables. Another thing that I do, I sing, because again, it's something, I'm a quiet person, and so making sure that I'm, in addition to doing the breathing where I've started to engage my diaphragm, singing is another way to make sure that you're doing that, and that you're almost giving your body permission to really go for it. And the way I do this, by if I'm giving a live presentation, or if I'm going to work, then I do it in the car on the way to work. If the presentation is kind of midway through the day, I might go take a break, still do it in my car, crank up the volume, and really go for it. Again, the purpose of this is to help your articulation. So if I find musicals, Julie Andrews, the Disney are good ones to make sure that you're listen to the singer and make sure that you're really enunciating. Pearl Jam is not a good option. They don't articulate anything. Hip hop as well is a really good one. As long as it's somebody that is good, as long as it's something that's going to help you, make sure that you're you're differentiating between the sounds. So. Okay, so do's and don'ts. Do be yourself. It's really, really important to be yourself, because you're gonna forget halfway through if you're trying to be somebody else. But do be the best version of yourself. Don't try to be funny if you're not. Do warm up every time. Every time, warm up. Don't doubt yourself. People came to see your presentation already thinking that you had something that they wanted to know about. If it's your peers, then they already know you. They should appreciate your insight. So don't doubt yourself. Do relax. Take the time to relax. To notice what's going on in your body. If you start to, since this was something that came up in the poll, during the presentation, if you start to feel be aware of your body. If you start to feel those shoulders coming up, stop, pause, take a breath. People a lot of times feel I partially blame Toastmasters for this, because Toastmasters likes to count how many times you say and and those filler words. Don't worry so much about the filler words. In fact, the best thing you can do to avoid filler words is just stop talking. Remember to pause, and instead of saying if you're not sure where to go, just pause. Give yourself a break. Everybody wants, even your audience needs a break. If you're talking the entire time, it's exhausting for them to listen the entire time. So give yourself a break, give them a break, pause, take a breath, relax. And okay, also don't slouch. So the posture is really important. It will help you communicate how passionate and excited you are about what it is that you're presenting on. So I'll pause there. Do we have more questions, Chanel?
No more questions, but some comments. Let's see. Note to self, don't tell a joke. So yeah, Ashley loves watching everyone's faces. Okay, so what if they fill the pause with an interruption? That's a good question.
Yes, so interruptions, like I said, that you could have a whole class on, or a whole presentation on how to handle audience members that are, disruptive. The best way I found is, so if somebody interrupts you, they're interrupting for a reason. That reason could be that they're just a jerk, and or it could be that they really love to hear themselves talk. It could be that they have a legitimate question, and your pause has given the opportunity for them to ask that question. If you don't give them an outlet to ask questions, then they're going to have to interrupt, especially people who are very, who are very engaged in the discussion. So if they're a jerk, there's not much you can do about a jerk, except you can engage that jerk. So if it's somebody who is on your team that you know their motivations, one, don't assume that you know their motivations. They could have, it could be very legitimate, that they're not intentionally trying to disrupt you. But if they're interrupting and it's not productive to the conversation, then take that opportunity to say, thank you for that. It's an important point that I'm going to cover later, or thank you, that's an important point, but not something that's pertinent to this discussion. Let's make sure that we talk about it later. Address it head on and say, this is when you can take control of your presentation and say, this is when I'm going to answer that question, or this is when we're going to have this discussion. But another way that you can engage them is, if it is important, or if it is pertinent to the presentation that you're giving, is put it back on them if you can, if it makes sense, and say, Jen, you've handled this kind of thing before. What suggestions would you have? What has worked in the past for you? And that does two things. One, it makes them part of the solution, that they now have to bring solutions to the table. And the other thing is, it gives you a chance to pause, take a drink of water, remember to relax, and start thinking about what you're going to be, where you're going to take the conversation next, where you're going to take the presentation next. Don't be afraid to interrupt and say, these are all great points, and I definitely want to make sure that we cover them. Let's make sure that we save it for the Q&A period. Let's make sure that we save it for the, maybe this is a better discussion that we schedule a separate meeting for. Is that helpful?
Okay, so another question from the Pinky says yes about her question being helpful. Another question from the chat is, how about engaging the audience by asking them a question? Should we quiz them to see if we haven't lost them?
So yes, and this is coming back to knowing yourself. The minute that you give your audience the microphone, so to speak, you are losing a little bit of control of the presentation. So if you're good with that, and you're good with improvisation, and making sure that dealing with the unknown, which is what's bound to happen when you try to engage the audience members, then great, do that. If you're not good at that, then I would avoid it, because you're only gonna create a more stressful situation for yourself. Otherwise, you should be engaging your audience somehow. If your presentation, if you've made sure that your presentation has the audio, visual, and hands-on elements that are there, and you're going through your slides at a regular pace, you're keeping your audience engaged. Polls are a good way to engage the audience without giving the microphone over to them. So that's one way to do that. Most people save the question and answer for the end. I personally like to break it up because I am comfortable with the unknown, and I'm okay. I'm also comfortable admitting that I don't know the answer. So if somebody asks something I don't know about, I'm perfectly comfortable saying, I have no idea. That's a really great question. So the point is to engage your audience. So absolutely, any way that you can that is helpful to what your purpose is, then do. If it's not helpful, again, coming back to knowing your point, what are you trying to get across? If that activity that would engage the audience is not helpful to you getting your point across, don't worry about it. Okay, any other questions?
Yes. Mike asks, any advice specific to doing presentations remotely, such as lighting, backdrops, etc.? Oh
yeah, there's tons. I'm not the best person to answer those. I do have a green screen behind me, or it looks like a boardroom, but it's a green screen. I'm not the best person to answer that. I think I'll give you a theater answer. 2 45-degree angle, par cans lit up for us. No, don't do that. Yeah, sorry.
Well, you're not cutting yourself enough slack because you did pretty good today.
Oh, thanks.
Okay. There's some chat going on, but it doesn't look like any more questions.
Okay. So the last section is knowing your subject. And this is one that it's very, very short because knowing your subject is, you're all professionals. You know your area of expertise. You know your subject, and there's too many variables for me to really expound too much on this. But what I'll talk through is some key elements of driving home. Again, what is your point? What are you trying to get across? Spend some time thinking about what this is. If you can spend some time thinking about, I want everybody kind of right now picture a presentation they've done recently or one that's coming up, and think about what is your point? What is the point of your presentation? Similar, along the same lines is, after this presentation is done, what do you want your audience to do differently? That should go along with your point. I'll speak to my presentation, this presentation right here. My point is that presentation skills are essential, and there's 3 things that you can do to make sure that you're doing them better. And what do I want my audience to do differently? What do I want to come out of this presentation? Well, selfishly, I don't want to see more bad presentations. So that's what I want everyone to do differently. Is I want you to think about the questions that I'm posing. Think about your audience, understand who they are, do the research to understand what they want from you. I want you to know yourself, know what you're good at, and what the things that you bring to the presentation that are core to who you are. And I want you to avoid the things that you're not good at. And I want you to do vocal warm-ups. And then what are the key ideas that you want to get across? These all are very similar, but what the key ideas element of it is that if you understand your key ideas, then it gets it's easier for you to repeat those key ideas over and over and over again, because the way people learn is through repetition. I remember when I was in art school, I had a art history professor who, at the beginning of the very first course that I took with him, he explained that if he wrote something on the board, he wanted to see it verbatim on the critical essays that we would write at the end of the midterm and final exams. It only took one midterm for anybody to understand that he was not joking. And there was one in particular, he was talking about Pablo Picasso. And he not only wrote it on the board in all caps, he repeated it several times in his lecture of the Cubism is all about angular geometric planes. I still remember that to this day, and it's been over 10 years because he repeated that so many times. So he got that key idea across. So that's why you want to make sure you understand your key ideas so that you can repeat them. One other thing that I'll talk about along with knowing your subject is you want to, doing the work to understand what your key ideas are, what you want people to do differently, and it's going to help you outline and not overload. So visually, these are real recent or fairly recent slides from training that I've done in the last year, and you can see, how important it is to less is more. This is great for the work that they did to get up to that point, but this is not what the audience wants to see. It's way too much information. This is a little bit better. They've got bullet points, but those bullet points are still pretty long, and your bullet points should be a guide and not a dissertation. It should be something to remind you as a way to say, oh yes, that's what I was going to talk about. All of this detail put into your notes, or put into an appendix. If it's a training and you want to have the slides for the training that are more dynamic and engage the audience, but you need the detail there for people to use later on for documentation or something like that, there's a place for it. The place is not during the presentation. And then we get a little bit better, their overview, they've kept it bullet points and very, not too many words within those bullet points. And then now we're starting to get to more of a visual element, which is more pleasing. And the reason I shrunk these down is this is a good way to see, are you overloading people? Step back from your computer from far away, and if it's still visually interesting and you can see the main points, then you're good. And if you step back away and you see this, then rethink. There was something else I was going to say, and now I've forgotten it. Well, it's gone forever. Do's and don'ts. Do outline your key points. Don't have a slide full of text. Rehearse. Don't get lost in the details. Do repeat important points. Do rehearse. Don't overcomplicate it. Don't forget your audience's perspective. Allow yourself, edit to allow yourself enough time. This is one that I see a lot of people run into, is that we think, we put all our slides together and then we go, great, I'm good. It's going to take me like 30 minutes, no problem. It is never going to take you as little time as you think that it's going to take you. And so my rule of thumb is I try to, if something is supposed to be a 45-minute presentation, I get it down to where I think it's going to take 15 to 20 minutes. And that generally works for me. Some other good tips are, if you can tell a story, if it's possible and you can use one person and tell a story all the way through and have that be a way to communicate your point, great. I try to bring up real examples of things that have happened with me and tell a story to help demonstrate that point. People connect with the real human experiences. And so telling a story is a way to again, engage your audience and make sure that it gives them the perspective of here, this is what happens in real life. This is not just theoretical. Here's a real life thing that's happening. Again, kind of going back to what we talked about at the beginning of knowing your audience, is do include an appendix with the support, with the evidence that you've got. And then another good thing to do is, if you know what the stakes are, if you've gone before and you've understood what the stakes are, have a contingency plan. If it's within you, if it's among your peers and something goes wrong, they understand, okay, maybe you don't have to do much except maybe email it to your coworker, and if your computer goes down, then they can pull it up. If it's an executive, I had to present to my CFO on a project that I was working on, and my boss's boss was going to be there with me. She made sure that I had my presentation ready to go on my laptop, that she had a backup presentation ready to go on her laptop, and then we emailed the CFO's admin to make sure with a PDF of the presentation, just in case. So have that contingency plan, especially if the stakes are high. So, questions?
There are a couple of questions in the chat. Regarding Q&A session, how should we manage to answer if we don't know the answer to someone's question or we go blank?
It's okay to admit that you don't know the answer. If you go blank, one of the things, again, pause, give yourself time to relax. Then go ahead, you can admit and say, that's a really great question that I didn't think about, and I need a little bit more time. I think I can come up with an answer for you, but give me a little bit more time, and then move on to the next question. And if you don't ever come up with an answer, they'll never know, because you're never going to come back to them.
Okay, and then I like the loading bar concept. Is there a way to have a timer towards the presenter to remind them they're on time?
I'm sure there is. Does anybody else know some cool ways that you can do that? I haven't seen it. Except, somebody at the front row going.
Yeah, I've seen people have like timers at the back of the room, or like a stoplight. I did Toastmasters for a while, and we had a stoplight sometimes. Yeah. So.
And I know that when watching Rebecca prepare for her presentation tonight, she had her slide deck up and she had the presenters slide up. And Microsoft actually has a time on top that tells you what time it is. And it also tells you how many minutes you've been on the slide, whether you saw it or not. So I thought that was cool.
It does. You have to actually see it and look at it. And
it's true.
Which means,
also, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. So if you've rehearsed enough, then you shouldn't have, and you've rehearsed with enough people, then you should know about what the time is going to be. And you should also be comfortable enough with the material that you don't always have to look at your notes, and you can go and look at how long you've been on that slide. Go ahead, Ashley.
I was just going to say, there's also resources out there. If you Google PowerPoint presentation timer, there's these are mostly for teachers use them to keep like students on task, or to keep things where you're going through presentations for, like, if a student's presenting, or if you're presenting to a certain thing, you have a certain amount of time. There are presentation free out there templates that have presentation timers in them. That's it.
What other questions are there? Well, if there aren't any more, how much time do we have, Chanel? Do we have time to do some breakout sessions?
Yeah, if anyone would like to stay on, I can stay on for a while, and we can do that. Of course, I said it was until 8, so it is 8 if people want to pop off. But if you're willing to stay on, I'm willing to stay on, and we can move into breakout rooms if that works for everybody. What do you think?
Okay. Well, I mean, we said we'd be done at 8. If there's, if anybody does have any questions, I'm happy to send out my email address, or you can hit me up in the DFW Slack. I'm happy to answer those questions. So we can probably sign off.
Okay, yeah. If anyone wants to stick around for a little bit and chat, I'll be here for at least 15 to 20 more minutes, and I can chat with you about any questions that you might have if you're a new person or want to network or whatever. But otherwise, everyone can hop off.
Thanks, everyone.